wait a while before people come in. Why don't I just simply say a prayer before we partake in the food, and I'll offer some instructions as to how we will get our food, and we'll let things unfold as they do. So let us pray. Gracious God, for the joy, the gift of joy, the gift of family, for the gift of Paul, we give you thanks. As we move from our Holy Communion, our Eucharistic celebration in which we remember your presence among us, help us also remember that Paul is with us, embraced by you in your eternal realm, and also walking with us as we continue our journey on earth. Keep Paul firmly in our hearts and minds, and may his memory be a blessing and a strength to us as we journey forward. We give you thanks. Amen. Amen. For this food, we give you thanks. So now, food. At your leisure, in good time, once everybody comes in here, you will move out of this door, down the hallway, and to the left. First door to the left.
Can we do it that way so people can come in? I would like them to get their food now because we need to start to talk. So yeah, let's have everybody now go there, get food, come back in here, settle down, because we've got a lot to say. So please go get your food with alacrity, because we got a lot to say. Hello everyone. Oh wait, you know what, I'm gonna yell. I know the acoustics here are terrible, but I'm Sarah Holbrook and I'm Paul Bosch's daughter, and he hated microphones. So I'm gonna yell and tell you all I'm so glad to see you here today. You honor us with your presence. I'm going to have people come to the mic, because not everybody wants to yell, but I like to yell. And share the remembrances of our dad. Super cash, get up, go back, get more food, sit down, get drinks, whatever. Nobody's going to mind. We just think we should be sharing a little bit about the things that we loved about Paul Bosch. I'll ask you to do the following. Do an introduction like this. I'm Sarah Holbrook. I'm Paul Bosch's daughter. Right? It doesn't have to be like super long in terms of an introduction, but we'd like to know how we can place you in the room with the people who loved Paul. So I know who you are, and I could introduce you, but I'm not going to. If you would just step up to the microphone.
Hello, everybody. I'm Richard Walsh, a friend of Paul, whom I love dearly. Chorister, painter, theater actor, director, and producer of liturgical dramas. That was also Paul Bosch. A multi-talented, inspirited man, full of the joy of life and deeply committed to, in his words, bringing in the kingdom. We had met 40 years ago when we had minor roles in a University of Waterloo production of Shakespeare's Richard III. And since that time became good friends. Paul produced and directed liturgical dramas locally in the medieval tradition, complete with a pageant wagon that he decorated. He staged the baptism of Jesus, for example, outdoors on campus, featuring Fred Ludolph as Jesus. And in Keffer Chapel and at St. Mark's Kitchener, he staged the Temptation of Christ with Michael Hackbush as Jesus and Debbie Lou and Fred Ludolph as Eve and Adam, respectively. Later, he played the perfect bumbling Polonius in a Laurier production of Hamlet, staged by our Laurier colleague Leslie Odell, and featuring Kate Hennig, from the Hennig family, as Hamlet. She, Kate, is a Stratford and Shaw Festival actor and playwright. Then in his 80s, Paul participated as an actor, costumer, and designer in productions that we staged here in the sanctuary with the assistance, among other people, of Sherwin Leffler. Paul brought to life such characters as the very model of a military dunce of a general in Don Juan in Hell, which is the third act of Shaw's Man and Superman. Among other roles, he played the prophetic voice of Tiresias, who confronts the tyrant Creon in the ancient Greek tragedy Antigone by Sophocles. Lastly, Paul crafted the props for our December 2017 adaptation of Charles Dickens' beloved novella, A Christmas Carol. At the end of the story, a redeemed Scrooge sends a youth to buy a turkey so that the Cratchit family can celebrate a proper Christmas dinner. So, in recognition of the inspiration that was and remains, here is the bird that Paul made for A Christmas Carol. In living flesh. What a turkey he was.
Oh my God, Richard, thank you so much. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. We're gonna leave. We have it as a wrap. I'll hold this and you take that. That's so great. Thing I have to get to today, I got to talk to Richard Walsh about a new play that we're going to be doing together. So anyhow, Richard was very much on your mind. Thank you. Did you want to come up and talk next? Right, you're just standing right there.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and remember, first and last name, how you know Dad.
My name is Fred Rudolph, briefly Jesus. I also did John the Baptist. Debbie Lou and I, Debbie Lou's over there, we lived with Paul and Kathy for a year and a bit in my last year of seminary, so that's where we met. Anyway, I want to tell 2, maybe 3 stories that reflect on Paul's love of creation, his incarnational sensibility, and indeed his preaching of the kingdom. So I'm going to start with the preaching of the kingdom. Paul, as you know, was a teacher and would seize the teaching moment at any moment, anywhere, amongst whoever he was with. And in a line about some notables and ne'er-do-wells,
Exit stage right.
I have no notes now, Richard. We were at the university at some assembly for something, right? Some church thing. Paul began to expound upon the kingdom of God. And Paul said that in the kingdom of God, every age of humankind will be represented. For example, take the 1960s, the age of peace and love. It will be represented in the kingdom of God. And I said, yes, Paul, but in the kingdom of God, where the 60s is represented, there will be less Paisley than there was in the 60s. And Paul did his, ha! He called me a smartass. It was so much fun to join in on Paul's just kind of full of all these wonderful things. Now the other thing was about art and appreciating creation. And Paul loved many forms, right? So one time we were I was Paul's perpetual roommate for many years at clergy retreats and other things. And so I went out west to some, again, church thing, and I was Paul's roommate. I arrived at like 11:30 at night. He was already in the room. We came on separate flights and all this. I come in using the key of the hotel room, and Paul says, "Fred, is that you?" And I said, "Yes, Paul. Who else would it be at 11:30? You know?" And he said, "You got to see my rear end." And I said, "Paul, why do I need to see your rear end at 11:30 at night?" And he leaps out of bed and says, "Look at this." And he was, which I'm sure he made for a play.
Salome.
And it was there for a long time. And as we cleaned out Paul Bosch's apartment with BB and so on, and we had to get rid of some things. It's interesting that the large life-size skeleton that was in the bedroom with the ghoulish figure
Two
was,
separate items.
was delivered somewhere like to Value Village or something, and was a prized item apparently. But no one appeared to want the ghoulish figure, so it ended up going with a bunch of stuff from our family and from the condo where I live to the Waterloo Regional Landfill site. And as I was emptying the truck, who should come around the corner but the person who, you know, kind of checks in to see if everything's going okay. Are you doing okay? Are you getting your stuff in? Are you at the right bin and everything? And there I am standing with a body ready to do everything. And all I could say was, nothing going on here. Everything's fine. No need to worry. She nodded. So maybe Paul got one more laugh on me.
Oh my God, that thing.
We loved our dear friend, and
Where's
it's
the
good to be here.
skeleton now?
Thank you.
Remember first and last name,
My name is Andre Laverne. You'll figure out how I knew Paul presently. A couple of days ago, someone said, would you speak? And I sort of consumed by it for the last 48 hours. So someone asked, what have you prepared? And one would call it an encomium. So it's a friend's homage to a friend. It finds its basis in a letter that I wrote to Paul. Technical difficulties. It finds its basis in a letter that I wrote to Paul on the 50th anniversary of his ordination. I had just celebrated my 25th, and try as I might, he forever remained a couple of decades ahead of me. Dear Paul, I remember the day we first met. I served on the local campus ministry committee at Waterloo. We were endeavoring to find a new chaplain, campus pastor, as you came to call yourself. We were interviewing candidates. Char Granskow was a member of the team, she's seated over there, as was Kay Wenzel at the back of the room, and the late Norm Stromberg. I think we were a little surprised at the interest of someone from outside the local bailiwick. Nonetheless, there you were. You wore your clergy blacks and a white Roman collar for the interview, and a lovely linen jacket. You carried nothing with you. You took no notes. You simply talked to us with open hands. You were the picture of youth in your 50s, and well-spoken. An artist with bon mots and mots justes, rash, full of life, funny and just so promising. I think we were wow. I think we fell in love. And it has been an incredible journey. When I contemplate you in my mind's eye, I think of you in 5 ways, for now among many. As the campus ministry guy at Waterloo, as one half of Paul and Kathy, as my mentor and teacher, as a terrific theologian, and as my friend. Campus ministry flourished in astonishing new ways under your careful stewardship. Paul would have complained about this fucking microphone. The ministry acquired a hay wagon, aforementioned, and a wardrobe, foreshadowing the props and costumes he devised for this space. Lots of young and old lives were touched. People got involved. People learned to celebrate life, to use joy as a verb. People were touched by your love for the arts, by your passion, by your charity, by your integrity, by your boundless energy, but for the hour beginning between 1 and 2. Kathy was a big part of your world in Waterloo. I often thought of how wonderfully supportive each of you was of the other's life and faith and vocation. I thought of you one day at church when we were reading the story of Cleopas and his partner welcoming Jesus into their home at the end of the day, and of Jesus' subsequent sharing a meal with the disciples, signals that God's reign really is now and near. You and Kathy and family did welcome near and now very, very well. I think of you as I shared with you privately and spoke of you publicly as my mentor and my teacher. It was you who gave me the language and fresh eyes with which to contemplate the dramatic, life-affirming, life-transforming possibilities of worship. I often found myself hearing your voice in my head or contemplating what you might say or do in connection with some project or other. Moreover, your mentorship entails so much more than the sharing of a single discipline. My God, a polymath with hand or tool or pen or brush, but not computers.
Thank you, Kevin.
3 of your paintings hang in our home. They date to 1962 and 1972. And at least one hints at the nuclear age and the hubris of the Vietnam War. You liked and appreciated, whether on Wreck Beach, in the sauna, or on the wall, nudity, or what we call the human form. And your witness around how our church welcomes people, how we listen to each other, how we behave hospitably, how we embrace one another, has been powerful, instructive, formative, and embodied for me. You appreciated the alphabet soup and rainbow stripe of human reality long before it was fashionable, much less welcome, and much less realized. You're a fine theologian. You called yourself a popularizer of religion. Sure, you made theology accessible, and you do theology very, very well, but you are more than a popularizer. Your considered witness to the gospel has always been located in an astonishingly and sometimes surprisingly orthodox Lutheran theology. What you popularize, you clearly understand. What you understand, you clearly live. Now live. For this witness alone, we are boldly thankful. But it never was about belief, was it? It was about witness and following and sensibilities and positive regard and love and grace. You were the first companion of the worship arts. Debbie Lou, who is here, followed in your train, as did I. I can still feel your hands, sometimes on my neck. You are my friend, and it was always fun to get into trouble with you. Yesterday, James and I were talking about you and the sheer number of people who knew you and recognized you on the street, or in the Chinese restaurant, which was your haunt in noon hour station in latter days. Several photographs. I dare say that the number of people who considered you friend, whether by virtue of sharing a common bit of life or a common larger journey, is untold. It's a really big number. I shall always treasure our friendship. Before I get the hook for your place in my life and for our friendship especially, and for your place in the lives and friendship you offered so very many of lesser and greater pulpits, I and we shall always be mindful and very, very grateful. With much love and with that of Barbara too, bon voyage, André.
Is the mic not working just because we're not, like, is it sensitive to where you're talking? Andre, do you want to speak next?
Evil humors.
I just want to say to Andre, you know, when our dad died, we had a lot of people reach out to us, my sister and I, and a bunch of the rest of our family members. And I'm fairly active on Facebook. I don't know why this thing, whatever. anyhow, but Andre had posted, and then it was lovely to read all the replies to his post from people I didn't know, but he knew, because it was so lovely to see, thank you, how important he was to a whole community of people that I wasn't familiar with, and that was a lovely thing. So thank you for your friendship, and also for just making it so easy for us to remember our dad in so many different ways. Did you want to speak, Tim?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay. And who are you? Don't forget to.
You know, I was thinking of Andre, the friend thing. I'm David Holbrook. I don't want to be yelled at later. I'm David Holbrook, married to a splendid and proud son-in-law of Paul. You know, I've thought since Paul died, I call a lot more people friend, in a way. He just had that really nice way about him. I just want to share 3 stories about Paul. And the first one really took place not long after here in the great country of Canada, after Kathy had died. And I had some work up in Toronto, so I came up. Sarah said, go to see Grandpa Paul, and of course I was thrilled. And we went to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. And those of you who have ordered with Paul can imagine the conversation with the waiter. Friend, I want a steak. I want rare, very rare. I want you to put it under your arm. That's about all the cooking it needs. I was like, who is this man? Then he had a baked potato with sour cream and more sour cream. And then the other thing we all know about him is the bread and, of course, the butter and the more butter and the more butter. I didn't know him very well. Sarah and I weren't married yet. But I certainly wanted to get to know him, but I didn't think I was going to have a lot of time the way he was eating. Actually, stripping Kathy as quick as he can. But he was a medical miracle. We know that from his heart operation. And he was a miracle in general. He was a miracle of a man. Story number 2. You know, I saw Paul preach a couple of times. You know, he was sort of later in his career. But he was amazing to watch him do his thing. Of course, the most memorable for me was at our wedding. And also, by the way, preaching, Sarah, you should mention her Facebook post. If you go to Facebook, she recorded something he did a year ago.
Yeah, maybe, was it April of 2021, maybe? Did we go? Yeah, I think that's right.
Sarah said to him, this, by the way, isn't one of my 3 stories. Sarah said to him, Paul, Grandpa, will you just say something? We're in this beautiful chapel that a friend of ours had built in the desert. He said, well, yes, I will. And he got up and did this beautiful 13, 14-minute piece that was wonderful. But the most memorable for me, of course, was our wedding. It was in Telluride, Colorado. There was a waterfall. It was beautiful. But what was remarkable was Paul. You know, I'd never really seen him like that. And he was kind of a revival preacher. If you look at the pictures, he's up like this, and his hair, and he was so dynamic. It was really, really wonderful to watch. And he spoke about God and marriage, and of course, my family are devout atheists. We stick to that, and yet what he managed to do in our wedding was bring the word of God into our marriage, but do it in a way that brought us all in. And here we were in this beautiful setting, and he brought in a way that my family of heathens could totally understand and really, really grasp. And I remember most his exhortation at the end of it, which was, he said, good marriages, you want to kiss hello, kiss goodbye. And really, it was exactly, of course, we do that today. And he was so good at what he did, people kept coming up to us and saying, we're already married, but we're thinking of getting married again, just so we can maybe have your back, do a thing, or we weren't going to get married, but he was so good, we are going to get married. So the third story was in 2000, not long after we were married, right when Kitty was born, our family of heathens went on a trip to Rome and brought Paul. And Paul was just so happy to be there. It was 2000, the Jubilee year in Rome. So I looked up the Jubilee, celebrated mercy of God and forgiveness of sins, which was appropriate given what Paul did that day at the Vatican. Forgiveness of sins. So here we are. St. Peter's, Christmas time is packed. There are tons of people. And Paul, of course, we're going to St. Peter's, is wearing his clerical collar. And this is 2000, he still had his cane. But he got around really well, but nonetheless, there he was. And there was a huge line to get in. So Paul, who I'm still getting to know, my father-in-law, who was married to us, the pious, we're all at the Vatican, he says, son, he said, I'm going to take your arm, and we're just going to walk a little slower. And all of a sudden he picked up a new limp. And the two of us, he was just walking around like this, and the two of us slowly ambled, and some kind Italian priest who worked for the Vatican says, Padre, and takes us around from the other side towards these sacred front doors of St. Peter's, where Paul practically skips in. And here we go, and he looks at me, and that twinkle in his eye, and said, I thought that would work. I do have one last story that's short. Was, again, early in my relationship with this great man, a friend of mine in Telluride does massages, and he worked on Paul for a long time. And afterwards he said, I just want you to know, I think you won the father-in-law lottery. And it was true. He was so kind, and so generous, so smart, so funny, and loving. He was such a loving man. And told me he loved me more than my own father. He was just so kind. And every time he saw me, he told me how proud he was of what I was doing with work, family we're building, all of it. It was really real. And just a miracle of a man, and we're all so blessed to have known him. And no more than you guys. You know, he loved you both so much. He was so proud of everything you've done with your lives. You were such good daughters. Anna, you were so wonderful. And you know, the epic Yosemite trip, there's a book there, holding his breath, holding his hands till he died. Yeah. It's beautiful. And I see him in both of you, and our kids, of course, but of course, especially Sarah. You, of course, you look like him, you share so much of his joy and wonder. And you start to make voices like him. I'm not sure that's a good thing, but it's real. Whoa! You start ordering more from Bush's. And you kids, a gift. Yeah. You had 20 years of having him in your life. Continue his legacy of being engaged in the world, caring for others. He had such a huge, deep commitment to peace. He just cared so much. I mean, you know, there was somebody said in the church, in peace and in war, and I was like, Paul was always about peace. But do those things, and most of all, laugh out loud whenever possible.
David had said, well, I'd like to speak at the memorial. I'm like, no, the memorial is a church service, but you can speak after. So anyhow, who else wants to come up? But anyhow, thank you, David, so much. Oh, Lorraine, yeah, awesome. We had mentioned, David had mentioned at our sermon how Dad said, kiss hello, kiss goodbye, and that was one of the things that our mom had taught him and us. And Lorraine, oh, well, you can introduce yourself and then say how you know us.
I'm Lorraine Green. My husband, Ron, would love to be here, except he's in the hospital right now. But Andre sparked this one. You mentioned that sacred hour between 1 and 2.
The nap.
Everybody knew about Paul's power naps. But Ron and I didn't at the time that, I mean, we had known Kathy and Paul since not long before they came to Canada, where we met by accident at a conference in Niagara Falls, where we discovered we were the only Kitchener-Waterloo people there. So that made a bond right there. And subsequently, Kathy ended up hiring me as one of her staff at KW Counseling. But anyway, after Kathy was diagnosed with cancer at some point, and I don't even know how the idea came about, that we would, the four of us, take a camping trip together up to Algonquin Park. Because we had a camper trailer, we could sleep in comfort. But then Paul said, well, the only trouble is that we have to go on to other friends' cottage, I think somewhere up around Charlotte Lake or somewhere north of Kingston. So we'd have to take both cars. So because neither Kathy nor Paul knew the way to getting into Algonquin Park, Paul rode with Ron as he drove our van and trailer. I drove I drove Kathy's car, and she beside me. So off we go up the 400, very uneventful. We pull into our camping spot in Algonquin Park, and all Ron could talk about was, "You should see Paul nap." He says to me, "I think I'll have a nap now." And he says, all of a sudden it went boink against the window, and he was out for the rest of the trip. Woke up fresh as a daisy as we pull into our spot, and all I'm thinking is, oh, I'd love to nap like that. So that a memorable thing about him.
Thank you, Lorraine. You know, I was a television news producer in a former life in New York City, so I worked with all the big anchors on all the networks, like Peter Jennings and Katie Couric and Diane Sawyer and Wolf Blitzer on CNN and Larry King. And when my dad would come visit me, especially after Mama died and it was just Dad, we would have lunch together, and then he'd be like, well, okay, it's time for my nap. And I'd be like, Peter Jennings, can my dad sleep on your sofa while you're on the set, you know, for an hour or so? So Dad had slept in the, you know, offices of basically every major anchor on network anchors across America, quite comfortably and with permission, of course, and without the anchor in the room for the most part. I'm sure there's other people who want to speak. Okay. Oh, Fred, you gonna speak, or are you just gonna get coffee?
I was gonna get cider, but I
Watch out.
my name is Fred Becker. Paul was my uncle. I am the oldest of Ruth, his youngest sister. And what I've been thinking of was a realization I had as an adult. I'm remembering when we would get together over Thanksgiving holidays, specifically in Syracuse. And one of the family traditions was to go to a movie. We would go to these movies, and it was Anna and Sarah and my two sisters and me, and then the four parents. And we would insist on sitting in a separate row. Because Paul would laugh so loud. We, as, you know, emerging teenagers, were perpetually embarrassed anyway, but it was just too much to take. And years later, I am with friends at the movie Sister Act. And I'm laughing so hard that the people in front of me turn around and ask me if I'm okay. And I realize that I have inherited that laugh.
Did Dad ever talk to any of you about seeing Fantastic Mr. Fox? He saw that with us after Thanksgiving one year and hated it so much. But anyhow, he could tell you all about it and why he didn't like it. But Wiley, you want to come up or do you want? Yes. Oh yeah. Okay.
Everyone here, he's youngest of his grandchildren. We have a funeral sermon here that he actually wrote himself for someone else, but it's so universally applicable that we thought it would be appropriate that we read it here.
Why don't you acknowledge who it was for?
Yes, it was for Fran Laubach, who
and
is
raise your hands, Emily and Ann.
Emily and Ann's
That was their
mother.
mom, their much beloved mother, who was like a second mother to us.
Can everyone hear me? I'm going to try to not use the microphone to honor my grandpa. Probably the most perplexing problem in philosophy, and also, I suppose, in science, goes by the fancy name of ontological necessity. Ontological, that means we're talking about being, existence. And necessity, that means what's the need there. So the philosophical problem, the scientific problem even, asks the question, what's the necessity for the existence of this or that? What's the need for this or that to exist, to be? An example, here's a mountain meadow filled with wildflowers that nobody sees. What's the need for that? Where's the necessity? As a friend says, where's the cost effectiveness in that? Or you, or me. or the whole cosmos? What's the necessity for it? Why should it exist in the first place? Why should you exist, or me, or the galaxies filling the universe? Science usually avoids this kind of question, the question why. It usually deals with only the what or the where, or the when or the how. The why questions are left to philosophy or to religion.
Well, the short answer, the answer to the why of ontological necessity, of course, is there is no necessity for it, none at all. So you could conclude it's simply a matter of chance. There's no necessity, no need that anything in the world should exist. But you could also conclude, if you're in any way a person of faith, that no, there's no need for any of it, therefore it is simply a gift. It's simply grace. That's the answer I prefer to come up with at the death of anyone, young or old. It's the same answer I'd give at the birth of anyone, incidentally. This person's life has simply been a gift to me. A gift from whom? A gift from what source? I'll leave that question for now and simply remind you that it's legitimate enough to call any human life a gift. Paul's life was certainly that for me, a gift, and for my whole family, and probably for you. Paul was a longtime loyal and loving friend. So it's always
this moment of sadness and sorrow when that gift is taken away in death, especially when that death is untimely. We all wanted Grandpa Paul to live longer, but he was 92. He lived pretty long. He didn't have to exist. There's no necessity in him having been part of our lives for these years. No ontological necessity for it. We could have altogether missed his presence, his ebullient personality, his gifts altogether. There's no necessity, no need for him to have been there for us. Flannery O'Connor, the American author, says somewhere that among human beings, the good is, quote, always under construction. I like that as a reminder that each of us is always a kind of work in progress. Each of us is never really finished, never really completed. We're all of us always under construction. And I like that also as a reminder that whatever good you could find in Grandpa's life, in the life of your parent, your child, your spouse, my own life, your life, whether it's been a full life like Grandpa Paul's, long, satisfying, fulfilling, or whether it's been a life cruelly cut short. In all cases, in every case, you have to say the same thing. That good has been a gift to us. That good is never really finished. That good is always under construction. And perhaps, who knows, by the grace of God, under construction still.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kitty Holbrook, and I have the extraordinary pleasure of being one of Paul's biological grandchildren. I specify biological because, contrary to popular belief, there are only 5 of us, despite the fact that the number of people out there calling Paul grandpa must be well into the hundreds by now. Grandpa seemed to find another common law grandchild wherever he went. Whether it was my childhood and college friends, turned Bosch adoptees when he came to visit, fully grown adults brought to youthful wonder in his presence, or random children on the subway, entranced from afar by his merry clowning. Remember the like?
Oh yeah. What do you mind of this though?
What's your name, friend? He would ask, and then add, my name's Paul, but you can call me Grandpa. And anyone would be a fool not to do just that, because who wouldn't want to claim a parcel of that joy as their own? That was him. He was Grandpa to all, perpetually building and uplifting a congregation on the go. And us bona fide progeny, we're just going to have to learn how to share. It's his joy that I want to pause on briefly. It's something that most of us have touched on this afternoon, because it's kind of impossible not to. Grandpa's default setting was joy. It inflected everything he did. I've been culling through old photos to put together this slideshow, and it's nearly impossible to find a photo of him where he's not smiling if he's not napping. In a 2002 essay debating the propriety of smiling during worship leadership, titled Julia Roberts, Orthodontist, Grandpa wrote, "I grin like an ape almost always. It's simply my temperament. It's in my genes and chromosomes. I walk down the street grinning like an ape to myself, lost in some reverie. I'm grinning like an ape even now as I write these words." The joy there is palpable. And yet, I want to put back on the notion that that was what completely defined him, because those who knew him also knew he had a signature crank to him, a sort of charmed crabbiness that also made him who he was. Whether he was Kubrick-style directing a family photograph, or negotiating a matter of millimeters within the arrangement of wall hangings, he approached life with a particularity that was wholly his own. And don't even get me started on getting him started on technology. For every essay of praise in that wonderful archive of his writing, which I really recommend you look at, it's on worship.ca. There's also, so for every article of praise, there's also an essay of complaint, specifically complaints levied against high tech and microphones and the abominable iPad and its interference with primary experience in Christian worship. He would hate that I'm reading this off my phone. Of the grandpa-isms, so much so was this crank part of him, I believe, that some of the grandpa-isms that have become most beloved in my immediate family, at least, are the ones born out of vexation. Oh, honestly, no parallax, or my personal favorite, grumble, 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 spelled out in email. I say all this not to expose him as someone less cheerful than we remember him to be, but to better sketch the man and his multitudes, show how his crabbiness was not at odds with his joy, but its complement. In the last conversation I had with him, he asked me what the best thing about being Paul Bosch's grandchild was. As I paused to think carefully about my answer, because how could one choose just one thing, he added, and I guess you can tell me what the worst part was too. Forever open-hearted, he made room for all of a person, the joy and the crab, the grumble grumble, and the ape-like grin. And so in that spirit, I wanted to tell a quick story about the last day we had with him. We sang him happy birthday on his deathbed, the poetic and comic potential of which did not go unnoticed at the time. And while I am neither a poet nor a comedian, there's something irresistible about the cadence of that exit. It's cyclical, symmetrical, Pascal even. But ultimately, it's the stuff of a sick joke, which was, as we all know, his very favorite genre. Think along the lines of, I'm gonna need a second opinion, the cat getting hit by the car, the Alzheimer's patients who forget they have cancer, and how many others who
All-star.
But on the morning of that he died, we were going to meet him, and then we were going to meet my mom at the Willows. And my mom said, make sure you pack the happy birthday crown. She had picked up the week before we knew he wouldn't make it past 92 and not. And as we got there, and we said, Wiley, you have the crown. And as Wiley pulled out the rainbow rhinestone diadem out of the bag, it became abundantly clear that it would be wildly inappropriate to crown his corpse, and how the heck had we thought that would be a good idea, and who the hell would even think about buying a birthday tiara for their grandpa in the first place, dead or alive. But then, as the incredulity settled, we looked at the crown, a sign of the kingdom, if we ever did see one, and we laughed, holding back our tears, and cried, holding back our laughter, reveling in the leprous splendor of the sick joke, just as he would have.
My name is Sarah Gransko. I am daughter to Charlotte Gransko and David Gransko. And I just started sobbing, thinking about something that came to me. one necessity, or the necessity in our cupboard is candy ginger. So when I was a kid, the home of Kathy and Paul, or Paul and Kathy, it was always Paul and Kathy, became a second home to us. And there was a lot of instability in our lives at that time. And Paul knew that I loved candy ginger. He had introduced me to it. Paul and Kathy had introduced me to it. And always made sure that they had it there for me. And he would take my cheeks and squeeze them and say, oh, look at you, and say, oh, honestly. And he did that well into adulthood. In fact, he did that the last time I saw him. But Kathy would sweep me into the kitchen, made sure I had everything that I needed, so I was kind of shy. And we talked, just her and I. So at one point, when Kathy was sick, I would sing by her bedside. And I sang the same song at Kathy's memorial that I sang at the beginning of the service today. And when I went and visited Paul after, he said, oh, I don't have any candy ginger. And I said, that's okay, I brought it. It's my turn. And he gave me a big hug. He didn't squeeze my cheeks. And he sobbed. And after that, I always brought the candy ginger. And to this day, my 5-year-old has it after dinner, and my 15-year-old puts it in his tea.
Graduated from high school, and then I was off to college, so a lot of it was never really my home, and I didn't really have a lot of cohorts at my age group, but Dad introduced us to the Grand Scouts, who I mispronounced as the Crenshaws, so they're the Crenshaw family in my heart and mind, and I love them all so much, so I'm so glad you guys were, so many of you are here today. And I think we can just keep, talking. I don't know, Jonathan, are you standing up to get coffee, or are you standing up to come talk?
Oh, I can do that.
I know you can.
Well, my name is Jonathan Allison. I live in Lexington, Kentucky, with my wife Anna, and Paul was my father-in-law, and I just think this is a great opportunity to give thanks for his love of our family, for his love as father-in-law, and for his love of my grandchildren, all the years of their lives. He was just such a wonderful man in so many ways that have already been described, so it's really hard to say anything new. I mean, most people have got all the jokes. I was going to say about parallax. I do remember the first time I met him. My wife and I at that time were doing a lot of horseback riding. It was a long time ago. And Anna and I were in jodhpurs and boots and helmets, and so was everyone else. And it was like, everybody was very well clad. And Anna said, you'll have to meet my father. And then this man emerged wearing jeans and topless. Came out of the back of the barn and gave me his hand and said, hello, I'm Paul. And I was struck by the candor of the moment and by his nakedness.
Just you wait.
And I saw a bit more of that as years passed.
Did he have pants on?
Well, and the candor continued. I still do remember, I don't think I shared this with you. He said, well, Jonathan, now you're married and you have children. He said, I think it may be time for a vasectomy. It's not that hard these days, it's just a snip. So I said I'd think about that respectfully. So many memories of him coming with us to Ireland, and he was always so overjoyed. I mean, he actually wrote his obituary, as many of you will know, and he wrote the skeleton of it, and one of the phrases that stuck out was that one of his gifts was a joyous joy of life. And a number of people spoke to me about the obituary and said, that's a lovely obituary, and I think he did have a joyous joy of life. And this meant that he wanted to take photographs of everything. And so when we were in Ireland, we would go to the beach and he'd take photographs, and we went to Yeats's grave and he'd take photographs. And
a friend of mine had a bit of a cottage with a turf fire in it, and he came out to me and said, "Jonathan, I think your father really likes it here, or your father-in-law really likes it here." I said, "Yeah, do you think so?" He said, "Yeah, he's taking photographs of our turf fire." So then, so many wonderful times at Hilton Head and Florida when he'd come and share spring breaks with us. We have wonderful memories of him at the swimming pool, and he just appreciated everything so much. One of the wonderful photographs we have is of he and Anna sitting on the beach, in their deck chairs, about 50 yards away, very near the ocean. And that's rather a nice picture. We got that last year. It all seems to have happened so suddenly, and so one of the last moments I shared with him when he was talking was when the Presbyterian minister in Lexington, Kentucky came and gave communion to Paul, and that was the Monday night of the week he died. And after we had communion, he said, "Thank you very much." And then he said to the minister, he said, "I think that the church has a lot of work to do." And then the Reverend Davis said, "Yes, I would agree with you, Paul." And he said, "Well, I think that our churches are not ecumenical enough. Would you agree?" And then Paul said, "Yes," Mark said, "Yes, indeed, our churches, even our church in Lexington, needs to do more work with ecumenism." And Paul said, "As a matter of fact, I don't think the Christian church should have split with the Jews in the first century." And Mark said, "Well, yes, indeed. We're going back a little far, and I think we have to live with it." But I like to think that his love of life extended to his love of theology, his love of history, his love of people, and I think we're all the better for that. So thank you to everyone today for bringing your love to him and sharing this moment with us. So, thank you.